Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Wise Woman podcast. This is a very special episode. We have my dear friend Silvy here, and we are going to talk all about relationships and boundaries. Silvy, thanks so much for being here.
I'm so honored. I'm so grateful to have met you in Austin, and I'm just so excited for this conversation with you.
And that's the fun part is we met so organically at kind of a big gathering and we naturally gravitated towards each other. I remember we were walking through Book People and we were hanging out in like this self-help section and we were just getting to know each other and it was an instant connection.
I mean, finding someone in the book aisle is kind of like a match made in heaven.
It really is surrounded by all of our friends, all these great teachings. The thing that I love about Sylvie, and we're going to talk about this as well, something that's so important in this industry is to have other women leaders that you can go to for advice. And I actually recently just did this where I was working through something with a client and I was able to call Sylvie and ask her perspective on the situation and other ways that I could support myself in this mentorship role and other ways that I could support this client. So let's start there. Sylvie, you are a guru when it comes to supporting people with relationships. And something that is so unique about you is you talk about boundaries. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yes, boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. Yes, it's such a huge conversation that I think every person struggles with on some level. I think every one of us is in some kind of exploration around how to have either firmer boundaries, and for some people, how to actually soften boundaries if they are holding them in a rigid way where they're not actually creating connection and intimacy with their loved one. So I think that's an interesting angle that doesn't also get addressed, that is really important to acknowledge. But I came across boundaries just from growing up in a household, my family system. There was definitely ways in which certain boundaries were not honored in the best way. And I grew up being very sensitive to certain things, of course, getting hurt, betrayed in some relationships, and just tolerating behaviors that I didn't know how to speak up about. I didn't have the language for. I didn't know that it was harmful. I just didn't understand it. And I think
Right.
that was the thing that really got me to explore the different kinds of boundaries, how to know when they're potentially getting violated, how to communicate them in non-shaming ways. And the definition I like to use when it comes to boundaries is think of yourself as you're holding this energetic field around you that's honoring the integrity of your sense of self. And we all have certain areas that we're vulnerable to. If our boundaries were violated physically or emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, those are going to be the areas where we might have to be more of an advocate for those boundaries until we experience a kind of healing around those things. And then we might be like, all right, I don't need to speak about these things anymore. And I have a really strong sense of internal awareness around this boundary. So it's a journey. It's a journey, but I really like to educate people on how to even know when their boundaries are getting violated so they can start speaking up about those things.
As a recovering people pleaser and still having moments where I absolutely people please, it's the way that I've defaulted for so long. The thing that resonates most, everything you're sharing resonates deeply, but we don't even know sometimes when our boundaries are being violated. Can you give us an example of that?
Yes. Yes, and I was drawn to the work of Rochelle Lerner, and she wrote a really great book on boundaries, and she really broke it down in a way that I was like, I have to teach this to everybody. It makes so much sense. And so, let's say you grew up in a family system where your emotional experience was invalidated constantly, dismissed, or you had a parent that vented to you, or it's that told you secrets or things that were really inappropriate developmentally as a child. Let's say your parents got divorced and one of your parents relied on you for emotional comfort. You could see how that could create a dynamic of codependency where the child is now feeling responsible to emotionally caretake a parent, which is a role reversal. It's not good for the kid. And so that child can grow up almost not recognizing when people are being that way towards them because it's so familiar. They have a really high tolerance for that behavior, even though that behavior is harmful for them. That's the emotional boundary violation. Then there's the intellectual boundary violation, which was mind-blowing because I don't think it's, again, talked about as much, is when somebody's making a lot of assumptions about you. So if you grew up in a house, let's say, where there was a really dominant parent, everyone has to believe the same thing. Everyone believes this religion, we have to practice it. Nobody really gets a say or really challenge or, kind of come up with their own experience around what they think, what their opinions are about something. Or somebody that's gaslighting you on the extreme end, right? This thing that you think happened, it never happened. Or we have a parent that comes home drunk every night, but nobody's talking about it. So the kid is like, my perception of the world is so distorted. So they might, grow up in relationships where people are making assumptions about them, or just not really validating their perception of an experience, and they're going to be drawn to people like that because that is the thing that they have a high tolerance for. Physical boundaries are the most universal and easier to understand. Somebody that touched you inappropriately, of course, anything from mild to rape on the extreme end, violence. But even small things, like if you grew up in a family system where parents were not attuned and they, aunts, uncles hugged you, touched you in ways that you could tell the child was really uncomfortable, and this repetition of bypassing that kid's comfort level. And then spiritual boundaries are the one that I really like to highlight because it's the one that creates the most harm and damage. Anyone that's been in a religious cult knows what I'm talking about listening to this. Somebody that just really uses spiritual language to bypass your experience, your lived experience. There's just this lack of consent, not awareness around allowing you to really discover your spiritual connection or non-spiritual connection for yourself. And, on extreme ends, cults that really take over and have these massive power dynamics over people and can really harm lives. Is that making sense?
Oh, absolutely. I think so often we can use spiritual terminology to emotionally bypass our own emotions or the emotions of others. I write about this in my book, how I can't love and light my way into. There's this very specific moment where I was living in a mostly silent ashram in South India, and it was a small group of about 11 or 12 yogis, and one of them was very, very openly anti-Semitic, denied the Holocaust. And in that moment of being so devoted to asana, yoga, yogic philosophy, I couldn't spiritually bypass myself in a way where I'm not going to speak up. And I think that is having a clear center of knowing who you are, having that alignment within self, and loving. There's one thing about people stepping over your boundaries, and it's another thing if you don't honor your own internal boundaries as well.
Beautiful.
And I think that's it's a big conversation, I think.
Yeah, because we could advocate, we could speak the boundary, and if the other person is not willing to understand or hear it, I think you said the golden phrase is to really cultivate that practice of whether or not this person validates it, I'm going to validate this. I know that this is true. I know that this is a boundary violation that's taking place. And while I would love for them to acknowledge that so we can move into deeper levels of connection, if they're not able to, I'm going to either do that for myself or really surround myself with people that are sensitive and attuned to those boundaries, because that's really how the healing happens. And I want to acknowledge that boundary violations, injuries happen all the time in the most innocent ways. It's a spectrum, right? There's like the day-to-day things that we do without realizing it, that we're just in the moment. And then there's the harmful, punishing, intentional, cruel ones on that end, right? So, my husband and I'll give an example of, when I would be really upset in the beginning of our relationship, I would be so fixated on being right that I would sometimes bypass his perception of the experience because I was like, I need to be validated. I need to be seen. And I remember one time we were in the middle of a fight that we were having. And he said to me, Silvy, you're violating like my perception of this experience. And you're not letting me have a different view of what happened. And I remember just like stopping in my tracks with like my eyes were like wide. And I just heard him. I heard that. And I think there's a humility that's required for all of us that are in relationships to be open to receiving when we are crossing over into somebody's sensitive areas. That's an area he's sensitive to. Intellectual one, I can tell when somebody's making assumptions and stories, and I can call that out very quickly. But emotional boundaries, I can get easily enmeshed. The people pleasing, like you said, I remember having to cancel a couple of calls this week because I was feeling really overwhelmed. I was sick to my stomach. And this is after 15 years of still doing this work. So I feel you on the people pleasing so deeply.
It's something we all are working on. I think it's part of our culture, or especially as women, to compromise in the name of people pleasing. So when you are working with somebody and it comes to improving relationships in their lives, do you typically always start with questions around their family system?
Yeah, so when I'm working with the client and they fill out an entire onboarding form where I learn about the qualities of their family system, parents, siblings, anyone important in the family system that really, impacted, played a role in their lives. Also cultural background, ethnic background, systemic issues that might also play a role in keeping them in the pain and the struggle that they're experiencing, which are very real things that oftentimes get neglected in working with in the healing world. But yeah, family of origin wounds and attachment wounds is kind of like the golden space that I like to learn about, to understand how a child attached to that primary caregiver, because a lot of those patterns and behaviors are getting recreated in their adult relationships. So if you want me to share, I could tell a little bit about what those attachment styles are.
Yeah,
We can dig
absolutely.
into them. Yeah. So when we experience a securely attached caregiver, and again, she or he or they only have to really respond in a tuned way 30% of the time. So this is new research that's coming out. This is not about perfection. 30% of the time they're attuned, but they make repairs really well. So if they miss the baby's need, they can easily see that they missed it and repair. 30%. So we have a lot of space here, with the caveat that that 70% is not harmful, right? We're not abusing, there's no neglect happening, the kid's not being left in the crib crying and crying, but there's a lot of resilience in children. And when that caregiver is really attuned and present, the majority of the time, that child learns to trust in themselves and the world, and they can develop an ability to really rely on people in healthy ways as adults. With anxious attachment, the caregiver is really on and off. So they're present a significant amount of the time, but then another part of the time, they're really unavailable, whether they're just working a lot or they're struggling with mental health. There's really valid reasons for this that happens sometimes. That's out of control of the parent, but that back and forth creates this child to kind of have leaving their sense of self to try to get that connection back. And they can feel a lot of that anxiety, fear of abandonment, physical, emotional, in their adult relationships. Avoidant attachment is when that caregiver is really neglectful emotionally, so they're not really attuned to that emotional space. And that child really starts to grow up to be someone that really is like a CEO of their own life. They take care of themselves. They focus a lot of their energy on work. They don't really prioritize relationships because they don't trust in relationships, right? It makes sense that they would not feel safe to trust. And then the one that came out more recently, I mean, like in the last kind of bunch, was the fearful avoidant attachment, which is really kids that grew up in chaotic, abusive, really intense environments. Sometimes that intergenerational trauma, grief that hasn't been resolved. A lot of Armenian families can have this experience because of the Armenian genocide. A lot of that trauma hasn't been resolved, and so the kids, are relating to caregivers in that way. And these people, like, they yearn for relationships, but as soon as they are feeling that closeness, they kind of want to opt out. So there's a lot of that kind of push pull that plays out. And so helping people understand that wiring so they can start to shift and create new ways of relating to people, changing their communication styles, understanding the stories and the patterns in their brains. I mean, there's a whole other, there's a world that we can dig into in this, but I'm going to stop there, and I want to just kind of hear what your thoughts are on that.
So often I talk to my clients about Amir Levine's book, Attached. And it focuses on those main three, right? Anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, and healthy attachment, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really good book, I think, to begin the conversation. And there's so many different layers to it. If you grew up in a healthy home, yet you've been dating for the last 2 decades, you're going to develop, even though you came from this healthy space and you have a healthy image of marriage, it is very likely that in our modern day world of dating, you might feel a little bit more anxious. In this rise of feminism, if you will, or women going out into the world and being hyper independent, this is allowing a lot of people to become more avoidant, or not just women, men and women becoming more avoidant. So for somebody who is listening and they are recognizing that they are anxiously attached, they are avoidant attached, if they're in a relationship or they're seeking a relationship, what are some practices they could do to come back into alignment?
So the term that I love to use with my clients is how to create secure functioning patterns. And that means you don't have to be this perfectly secure person that doesn't even exist anyway. But there is no need to put this pressure on yourself to not be who you are, but to have a really strong awareness of your sense of self, almost like a meditative practice around observing your thoughts, observing how you relate in relationships, right? Kind of knowing where the starting point is for you. And in order to create those secure functioning patterns, it requires us to show up in a new way. And those are skills that get to be learned. So when I'm working with someone that has more anxious patterns before dates, there's practices I have them do: working out, moving their body, having a friend on standby to call if they need to go to the bathroom to help them regulate. To not put so much pressure on getting chosen, because that's the big thing, right? If I can't tolerate my anxiety, I want to be chosen by this person, but I don't even know if I like them. I just want to be chosen so badly. So just helping them to understand the unrealistic expectations that are present, helping them to slow down, really working on that regulation piece. And then with someone that has more avoidant patterns, we're working on a very different skill set, which is actually leaning towards more vulnerability, actually sharing more of yourself, because they tend to really hide, and they don't allow themselves to be seen because it's terrifying to not be able to trust in the other person being warm, caring, responsive, and really starting to choose different people that are going to allow them to have a corrective healing experience. This is the biggest one. So if you're somebody that has more anxious patterns, look for someone who shows up consistently. Look for someone that has a reliable sense of self, not 100% of the time, but are they somebody that shows up in a reliable way in their other relationships? Ask questions that can help you assess that. With someone with more avoidant attachment, your corrective healing experience is being around somebody that's warm and caring and actually is curious about you, wants to know you, right? That's healing. It's going to feel terrifying at first because you're like, I don't want to be seen. But that's the slow building muscle that you can start practicing so that you can have those loving, caring, secure relationships that we all want?
I love how you call this corrective healing experiences. Tell me more about this terminology.
Yes, I believe it was Dr. Stan Tatkin who first coined that term, which I have a really funny story about that I'll share later about Brian and I having a therapy session with him. He's like the grandfather of attachment right now. And, his work is all about that secure functioning dynamic and how to create that. And so when I'm working with people, I think one of the biggest questions that comes up is, how do I know if this is the right relationship? We all think this, right? And how do I know if this is a place that I'm not going to get hurt? And first and foremost, there's no guarantee for any of this. For all of us listening, there's no guarantee. And you can still take calculated risks so that you are choosing to invest in people that are going to at least show you qualities that are going to feel reparative for you, right? Brian and I are opposite. My husband and I are opposite in so many ways. I lean more anxious tendencies. He has more avoidant tendencies. We talk about this publicly, so he would totally be fine with me sharing this. It's like, share away. And so we had to learn, right? I had to learn when I would approach him, instead of assuming that he's doing something to hurt me, or that he doesn't care, because that's the patterning in anxious attachment. They don't care about me. I would come with that assumption. And he's like, that is the furthest thing from the truth. Like, even with you starting a conversation with that notion makes me want to shut down. So we had a lot of conversations about where we started and how non-skillful it was. And we learned along the way, slowly, with lots of communication. As I imagine, when you're in a long-term relationship, it's a lot of talking. And for him, it was so hard for him to trust me. I was like, I'm here. I couldn't be more available. I'm like a golden retriever puppy dog. But it took him 7 years. He often says that to me. It took me 7 years to really not just trust in you, but to trust in relationship. That's powerful. And so, over time, he had to choose somebody that was reliable emotionally, that really wanted relationship. I'm very curious about him. I engage him on a very deep level. I'm very attuned to his emotional experience, even though that's probably really uncomfortable in the beginning. And for him, he also gives me a lot of space, and he helps me connect back to myself. And I think that's also the gift for somebody that has more anxious patterns. We've spent so much of our lives trying to make sure connection is there out there, that we leave our sense of self. It's painful, because we're like, well, I just want to make sure that the relationship is secure. When the relationship is secure, you feel like you could just come back to you, come back to your home. And I feel like that's the gift exchange, one of the gift exchange that me and my partner have experienced. Do any of these kind of stand up for you? And obviously you don't have to share anything personal that you don't want to share, of course, but I'm curious if there's any of the attachment patterns that come up for you, Erin.
I love this conversation so much. I love how you and Brian talk about your relationship so openly. John is the feeling of home, and that is almost what excelled our relationship, if you will. We met and we could have gotten married the next day. We just were very in it from right away. I do think it was because I was so clear on what I was calling in. I was so devoted to my everyday manifestation practice. And I remember dating. I remember being in that sphere. I remember the feeling states of praying that this would be different. This next first date would be different than all the others. I also work with my clients so often on manifesting their highest possible soulmates. And there are so many different relationships that I have a theory that oftentimes before you meet the one, you have kind of a shitty relationship. Like, before you meet the person you're really supposed to be with, you have a relationship that really challenges you. And it's not necessarily a relationship that you're in a very long term. It's kind of short, sweet, to the point, and just shows you that you need to make a little bit of different decisions. I kind of want to pivot this conversation a tad, because someone asked me recently, how do you make friends later in life? How do you make friends as an adult woman? And I think about you so often in those situations, because you and I were together during some pretty sensitive moments in both of our lives. And we found each other and met each other during this time. We also were neighbors during this time, which was absolutely synchronicity, serendipitous, and very divine. For someone that's coming to you and they want to have more like-minded female friends, how can we make friends as adults?
Yeah, I mean, I think I use kind of two frames when I'm working with people around this. The attachment frame is also really important in friendship, because a lot of the same attachment woundings can show up in friendship as well. And I also think, for anyone that's listening to this podcast, your podcast, they're obviously somebody that cares about self-awareness and growth. There's no doubt about that. Spiritual connection, growth. And I think we're naturally going to be drawn to people who share certain values, right? Who value certain things. I value depth. I value vulnerability. I value humility. Those are probably like some of my core values, not just romantic relationship wise, but friendship wise. And so I think spending that time to really get to know what are some of those core values that are present in your life right now. Really taking an inventory of, I would say just focus on two to three max things. You're probably already gonna, it's already happening intuitively, right? The fact that we were drawn to each other, obviously you couldn't be more of a deep soul, Erin. Like I think about you, I just listened to one of your episodes, I just told you, I was like dropping into this well of depth of wisdom and just beauty and richness, and it was just incredible to be in your presence. And I feel more connected to myself when in conversation with you. And so I think we're already going to naturally feel drawn, like our body, we just feel that drawn to certain people. But that clarity piece of just like spending that time, getting to know what are those values, what are you really into? And sometimes, like I know for me, I don't have many of my childhood friends that are in my life anymore because we grew in such different directions. I have maybe like two or three, but it's also, for people that are on this path, it can be also really painful, I think, not that we need to end the relationship with everyone from our past, but when the core values are so fundamentally different and people are prioritizing such different things, it can be hard to also stay in relationship with that as well. So I think that grief of loss of the previous self can be painful, and figuring out where people fit in your life. Are they in the inner circle? Are they in the, more casual acquaintance? Are they in a networking circle? I used to try to put everyone in the inner circle. I wanted to have everybody close to my heart. And it was painful. It felt very rejecting because I was like, they don't want to be in the inner circle, but why would I put everybody there? That doesn't even make logical sense. You can't, right? I'm curious, I would love to hear from like what your thoughts are on that, Erin.
I remember when you and I became close, we were both talking about these communities that we were building in Austin. And you, during that time, you were doing Bumble BFF, right?
Yes.
And I loved that so much about you. It just showed how devoted you were to bringing like-minded women into your life, because to have a good girlfriend that you can lean on, it's life-changing to bring these women together. And I do think actually quite naturally, when you're in a place of flow, like right now we're in Costa Rica, I would have to go out of my way to not make friends. Like I would have to, it's just so natural. It's so self-selective here. Even in Austin, it attracted so many entrepreneurs, so many deep thinkers, so many authors, so many people that wanted to have these very in-depth conscious relationships and conversations. So for anybody that is looking to bring more aligned relationships into their life, and what we know about the science of happiness and the PERMA model, there's R in relationships. We do in the West have happiness down to a science, although I will say in mindfulness, it's okay to not be happy all the time. We are so obsessed with happiness in the West. However, Seligman created the PERMA model, and the R in the PERMA model is relationships. So when women specifically are looking to cultivate strong female relationships, I encourage them to go to networking events. I encourage them to start women's circles, councils, COUNSOUL. This is where you delegate matters of the soul. And it's invite only, inviting in people that you feel connected to. Start a reading group at your company. Go to a yoga studio. You have to go out of your way and take aligned action to cultivate these relationships. But one of the greatest tools of all, and even I think maybe you and I even did this, the thing that worked so well for me is early on in my spiritual journey, when I was so desperate to talk about God and manifestation and yoga. I was like 22, 23, wintertime in Chicago, seasonal depression, going through another breakup with my study abroad boyfriend. And I started posting spiritual quotes. And I paid attention to who responded, to who resonated with it. And I had a couple friends from Chicago say, oh my God, I also love this book. Oh my God, I also love this quote. Wow, when you posted that smoothie bowl or whatever I made, what did I make in the wintertime? That healthy, nourishing soup. Oh my God, it so resonated with me. And I cultivated those relationships, because that's people throwing their hand up and saying, I see what you're sharing with the world. I also want to have conversations around what you are sharing with the world. So I always think that's a fun place to start.
I love that also, Erin, because you're taking the things you value and you're broadcasting them. You're not waiting for that other person to be those things. You're actually saying, hey, this is what I'm about. So you get to see who's also about those things. And that's exactly it. That there is no other way. We have to model those things.
And there's something else you said that I know why we get along so well, and it's because you called yourself a golden retriever, and my number one value is loyalty, like loyalty and honesty. And once you have, and I think it's like this Chicago Midwest core of my being, but there's nothing in this modern day quick-paced world, there is nothing like loyalty. Like your ride or die, like somebody that's gonna have your back even if you mess up. Loyalty is so gorgeous and rare, I think.
It's huge. There's this question that Esther Perel prompts to people. Were you conditioned for loyalty or autonomy? I'm like, ooh, that's an interesting exploration. And I definitely, loyalty all the way. My family system, we were immigrants. We moved here to America when I was 4, just the 4 of us. It was like this really small, tight nuclear family that, we were everything to each other. No extended family, no real friends for my parents. Yeah, I mean, that took so much time to get there. And, I think for me, I've had to really learn to know who to be loyal to, and really make sure from the beginning that there's those core things, because I think I've also held on too long in certain relationships where I felt like I was over functioning in a lot of ways and carrying it. And I was like, please just come to therapy. Let's work on this. There's this thing that's in the way. And I would cry and I would like, please and there was no willingness on the other side. It was so painful. I would stay in for years. And it's a hard line, Erin, because of course, like we all want to be loyal, and it's very important to me, and it's important for me to be loyal to someone who's also willing to really show up and confront and be vulnerable and do the work with me,
That's a really good question to meditate on, autonomy or loyalty.
I would say most American culture is really focused on that autonomy. Some aren't, of course, but it's the American value of freedom,
There's a question that I texted you that I think would be a really interesting segue, because as it relates to relationships, and you asked me where this could come up with John and I, there are moments, and I try really hard not to, because I don't want to be this type of wife, let alone like I don't want to be this type of person where I fall into the mothering role with John. And it's so subtle. It's not what I thought it would be when I first kind of started working with my clients around mothering, commentary on driving, or to like make sure the oven is off. It's just an anxious way to confirm that. Let me think of a good example. Sometimes it's like, did you check that the front door was locked, or did you? We booked. I'll give you an example. We booked these plane tickets. Once you come to Costa Rica, you need to show proof that you are going to eventually leave, so that you're not an illegal immigrant. And we totally forgot this. We've been coming here a million times, and we kind of forgot this. And we came on a one-way plane ticket, and we're standing in customs, and John quickly booked like a pretty expensive flight through United, just to show them that we are going to eventually leave. And with United, you can cancel in 24 hours. And one way my mothering came out was, you sure you canceled the flight? Like, you have confirmation that the flight was canceled. I mean, this is like a silly example, but I see it so often with my clients, where we have that repetitive, mothering, meticulous voice that's definitely anxious over and over and over again. Do you ever see this in your work?
Definitely. I mean, I do that with Brian all the time.
Yeah.
He's often being like, Sylvie, I got this. Back off. I'm like, okay. But I kind of sometimes just need to hear that, so that it is coming from me for an anxious place too. I do think a lot of women take on a lot of the mental load in relationships. I think it's a very kind of We're natural multitaskers. It's very wired into a lot of our DNA and primal ways of being. And so how to kind of delegate those things and allow somebody else to take care of us and do that, all those other things, it's a tricky balance, you know. And I know I'm wired more anxiously in general, so I can, you know, very quickly go from neutral to panic. So I could see how that also shows up for me in moments where, oh my God, am I going to be taken care of? Am I going to get in trouble? Are we going to be okay? You know, I think it's very human. I really do. You know?
I like that. So gentleness.
Yeah, and it's the awareness, right? It's just even you knowing that you do that sometimes, right? So you can say like, I know I'm mothering you right now, and I know you got this. I trust you. But sometimes just hearing a little bit of even that reassurance, like, okay, I got this, or even if I don't got everything perfectly, if I make a mistake, I will always repair, or I will fix it. I will take care of you. I'm here. I got you. My husband wrote a blog years and years ago, and it was like the three sexiest words a woman can hear. I got this. It definitely went viral, you know, and I think there's something about the feminine just feeling like she wants to be held. And in like a split second when we feel not held, we can be like, oh, am I not held? Even though 99.999% of the time, we're held. But it's that little glimmer, right? It's fascinating. We're humans are fascinating creatures, aren't we?
There's a framework that I've been working with that I feel like all my clients, whether we're focusing on business coaching or the aligned coaching certification, when we're talking about relationships, there's a framework that I've just brought up so many times in the last couple weeks, which maybe with this full moon, relationships are kind of bubbling a little bit. But in moments of conflict, for a woman to feel really seen, it's, does she need to be heard? Does she need to be hugged? Or do you need to brainstorm?
I love that. I love
I
that.
usually need it in that order. I need to be able to just like word vomit everything going on. And then I want to be held like I'm a little baby. And then I want the masculine to come in and do what they do best, which is the fixer. So let's brainstorm. Yeah, let's brainstorm different ways to solve this obstacle.
Yeah, because sometimes being witnessed and seen is not enough, right? Sometimes we need practical, actual things. We need some of that mental load piece to be kind of delegated with so that we can feel like we can relax and rest into our sense of self and our bodies, you know? It's huge.
What I love so much about this, so many things I love about this conversation, and I love being with you. It's the best. I love when we get to be together. And we need more in real time, quality time together.
It's coming.
It's coming. It's coming. I think LA, Costa Rica, it will definitely align.
Absolutely.
So kind of we're not all the way at the end yet, but when it comes to somebody who wants to get to their next level in their relationships, and they want to, I know we're talking about boundaries.
Yeah.
If I wanted to assess in my life if there's been a subtle boundary that has been compromised, how could I do that?
You know, assessing whether there's been boundary violations in a relationship, especially, so I was in a friendship for many, many years, and there was certain things that happened that I did not know were happening, but that they were seeping in me. They were happening, and I was having a reaction that I wasn't aware of until much later. Passive aggressiveness, little jokes at my expense, not really respecting my boundaries when I would speak up about certain things. And I think we have to pay attention to feelings of frustration, anger. Anger is a really good cue for boundary violation. On the extreme end of a boundary violation is a betrayal, infidelity. You're violating the boundary of our relationship, right? Our relationship exists. We have the self boundary, then we have the relational boundary. And Stan Tacken talks about the concept of thirds, like these entities around the relationships that could potentially become threats if they're not managed well. And So betrayal is when a threat actually seeps into the relationship or there's an agreement that's broken. So having anger, frustration, resistance, just feeling like repelled by your partner, like you're not really able to connect. Maybe you're having resistance around sexuality with them. Those are good potential cues that something needs to potentially be addressed. Sometimes it's not a boundary being violated, but it's a wound of yours that's coming up that might feel like it's a boundary, right? So there's a lot of nuance here. But so in that relationship, I remember I didn't speak up because I didn't have the language, and then I felt like it was like a volcano that ended up eroding, and we couldn't repair. It was just too much had gone by. But through that experience, I learned I need to start speaking up soon. As soon as the little things happen, not from a place of blame, not from a place of attacking, but just, hey, like when this happens, I feel like this is an area I'm sensitive about. When you make jokes at my expense, or when you're you make jokes in this kind of passive aggressive way, I really don't like that. It makes me feel really uncomfortable. And I practiced that with Brian from the beginning. That relationship had to kind of end for me to do inventory. I looked at it like, why didn't I speak up? And you said something about contrast that I think is really valuable, right? We look at breakups and relational endings, we judge ourselves, we can really be hard on ourselves about that, but they're so rich and potent with information about what didn't work, right? What can we learn from that? What do I need to speak up about sooner? How can I prioritize my values and ask certain questions in the earlier stage, my needs, don't wait. I say this to people, start early so that you can, if you don't talk about those things, you're not going to know if somebody's going to be able to be honoring of those boundaries. But also make sure you do it in a way that's not shaming, not attacking, because that can also affect how the other person is able to respond and be comforting towards us, right?
This is so beautiful, Sylvie. And the thing that brings it home for me is everything that you said. When you allow the same person, a friend that you grew up with, overstep the boundary a little bit, it ends up not being their fault because we allowed them to treat us that way. Like we allowed them to paint this picture of us. And I just reflect on that so deeply because I do have a handful of relationships like that in my life where I've just allowed them to see me as, the silly one, the middle child, whatever the archetype that I'm stepping into is. I think there's so much rich information there.
And it's if you're anyone that's in that exploration, it's just please be gentle with yourself, but do that inventory, right? Like what boundaries am I vulnerable to? What role did I take on as a child that might also be preventing me from speaking up about those things? If you were a caretaker as a child, and had to kind of hold down the fort, it's going to be hard for you to speak up about your needs. You might have shame around that. You might have so much guilt because your moral compass is like, no, 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 I need to be the one to take care of everyone. I don't get to have needs. So it's a little bit of a mind, you have to really look at like, I was working with a client this week and I was sharing the guilt that I was feeling from setting a certain boundary. And I was like, I felt sick to my stomach. I still felt guilt. And that bad feeling that we feel, that discomfort, doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. And that's the hard part because we're like, it shouldn't feel bad. I should feel good setting this boundary. But no, it's not comfortable. But is setting this boundary gonna actually protect the relationship long term? It's not just about you protecting you. If you don't speak up, like I didn't speak up about certain things, the relationship, we couldn't repair it, And also this person was really not good with responding to boundaries. So I'm not going to take all the responsibility on that, because I have a lot of friends in my life that are amazing at responding to the boundaries. Like you're amazing at responding to boundaries. Like there are people that are just sensitive and just really respect you. And there's people that are called like boundary bulldozers where they just want to get their needs met at all costs and they're not really able to be relationally sensitive, or their abandoned mood gets triggered so bad that they can't tolerate. There's so many intricacies in the boundaries conversation that I know we could forever explore together. Yeah.
Where could if somebody wanted to hone in more on the conversation of boundaries, are there any books or podcasts that you would recommend?
I actually have a boundaries course that I created with my husband as we share all the things we've learned in our own journeys, including being in a cult and how we work through repairing the boundaries there. And my emotional boundaries, his intellectual one, is called the Boundaries Program, and you can find that on my website. What is another one? There's a book by Raquel Lerner that I'm blanking out on the name, but I'll message it to you if you want to add it to the show notes. I'm happy to send that to
Perfect.
you as well. Yeah. Raquel Lerner.
Assuming that this episode goes completely viral and supports people everywhere, what is some wisdom you would like to share?
I think the biggest wisdom that I think is my life's purpose on this earth is just really expanding your self-awareness alongside of the relational skills and awareness. I think there's a lot of focus right now in the world on the self, which is beautiful and important and necessary, especially for those of us like women who've had to really leave self to tend to everyone else. That self is so valuable, but to always be bridging that with the relational, with the skills that is going to allow you to have beautiful, thriving, nourishing relationships, and learning how to communicate your insides in a way that's inviting and clear and boundaried and powerful, and that bridge. I think, you speak about the East and West bridge. Mine is the relational and self bridge, and I think that's a really important place that we need to focus on if we want to create healthy relationships with people.
Healthy relationships. It's such a good goal.
It is. Yeah.
How can people find you?
I would say the first hub would be my Instagram page. I won't spell my name because it's long. I'll let you put that in wherever you want to put that. And my website, I work with clients one-on-one. I'm probably taking on just a couple more at the moment. And I'll be starting my book process very, very soon. So book is coming. I'll have to share more with you behind the scenes on that. But if you want to work with
Yay.
me one-on-one, you can book a free consultation in the link in my bio.
Oh my God, I'm so excited for this book. I will champion it with you. It's just the wisdom, it's the medicine. Sylvie, you're the best. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Erin. I love you. And I'm just so excited for people to hear this conversation with us.
Me as well. Love you.
Love you.